So Geshe began by reciting a verse that is requesting for blessings to be able to keep up proper, perfect discipline, ethical discipline. We have to consider that in this life we have obtained the precious human rebirth, and we had the great opportunity to meet the teachings of the Lam Rim that are the essence of all the various teachings of the Buddha. So we had this incredible fortune to be practitioners of the Lam Rim, and we have become special individuals because of this. So all of this lies or hinders upon the fact that we have obtained a precious human rebirth in this life. But this is the result of having practiced generosity, having practiced ethical discipline in our previous life. The three main reasons that establish precious human rebirth is, first of all, keeping completely pure ethics. Secondly, engaging in the assisting practices of the six perfections. And thirdly, doing pure prayers to that end, to obtain that precious human rebirth. So the combination of those three things in the past have made sure that we have found this precious human rebirth in this life that is so difficult to obtain. Having obtained precious human rebirth now in this life, we should do our best to practice ethics and morality as purely as possible so that we will create the causes so that we will continue to have precious human rebirth in our future lives. So when we talk about morality and ethics, there are, of course, different levels of vows or different types of morality. It all begins with the ethics of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions. That would be level number 1. Then level number 2, we have vows of individual liberation. So for those who are ordained, they are the vows of ordination for the male and the female, Gelug and Gelugma. But if you are a lay practitioner, you have the Genyen vows. And if you do take these Genyen vows, it's very important that you absolutely maintain the ethical discipline that comes, the commitments that come with that. Then on the 3rd level, we see that we have Bodhisattva vows. Bodhisattva vows are very important for us because all of us, we have obtained action tantra, performance tantra initiation and above, and always Bodhisattva vows are given. And every time we take the Bodhisattva vows, of course, these come with commitments, and we have to be very careful with our Bodhisattva vows. Then the last level, the 4th level, are tantric vows. And this is a whole chapter of its own. It's quite complicated. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that in the course of the day, every day, we should try to maintain ethics as much as we can. And as we say, it begins with the first basic levels, which is the morality of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions. The 10 non-virtuous actions include 3 physical, 4 verbal, and 3 mental actions. And avoiding the non-virtuous actions, you will establish virtuous activities. So just as we talk about the 10 non-virtuous actions, we can talk about 10 virtuous actions. So to begin looking at them, the 3 non-virtuous actions in relation to our body are killing, stealing, and sexual activity or sexual misconduct. Okay, so for the first one, killing, obviously in our case, usually we don't have the motivation to go out and kill a big animal for whatever reason. However, many times, because let's say we are distracted, we might kill small animals, insects, for example, a mosquito. Or when you're walking down the street, you don't, look where you put your feet and you might step on some insects and therefore kill insects. So we have to be very careful and every day remind ourselves that I will not kill. So reinforce that intention that says, I will not kill. And if killing actually occurs, it is very important that we engage in practices that will counteract this. So, for example, engaging in animal liberation. Animal liberation is an incredible practice because it guarantees that you overcome whatever negativity you have created with killing in this way, but also in your future life, you would have long and healthy life and so forth. So definitely this we should remind ourselves, I should abandon all killing, including that of small insects and small animals, and engage as much as possible in animal liberation and so forth. So when we talk about ethics or morality, the actual word in Tibetan is going according to the law. Okay, so we know in society we have laws, we have rules, and if we break those, like if we disturb, if we create some disturbance in society, obviously, we will have to answer for this, right? We might be taken to court, we might be taken to jail, depending on the seriousness of the situation. So here also, we are talking about the law of Dharma. So if you go against the law of Dharma, you are breaking the codes of morality, the ethical law. So this is the meaning of the term for morality. Okay, the second non-virtuous physical activity is taking that which is not given. So in other words, stealing, right? Now, we're not the type of people who would go out and steal anything, but it is very important every day to remind ourselves and say, I would never steal anything. So just that reinforcing that intention. And now we come to the third one, the third activity. If you are ordained, the non-virtuous action is engaging in any type of sexual activity. If you are a lay person, it is interpreted as sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct means you are in a committed relationship and you go out looking for another person, or you try to form a relationship by taking the partner of somebody else. So we all know how upsetting this situation can be, and therefore it is considered a non-virtuous action. So as we say, abandon the three non-virtuous physical activities, and instead of that, engage in three virtuous physical activities. So we talked about the three physical non-virtuous actions. These are activities, as you say, they're in the category of physical. And for example, in the case of killing, they involve physical activities. So you would pick up, let's say, some sort of a sharp weapon or a club or some other instrument. You will hit another living being, you will cause injury, eventually you will cause the death, and so forth. At times you do it, you are directly involved, like you are the agent of that killing or stealing or sexual misconduct, but many times you might order or ask somebody else to carry out the activity. In this case, both yourself, who is giving the order, and the person who carries it out, you both accumulate the negativity of that negative action. So to give you an example, these days with a warfare, like the generals are hardly ever in the battlefield. Usually they are in an operation room and they give the command to the soldiers. So the soldiers are the ones who have to actually carry out the activity of killing. But both the general who gives the command and the soldiers who carry it out accumulate that negative karma. The same thing with stealing. You might ask someone to do the stealing on your behalf. So both you and that person accumulate this activity and so forth. So as we say, very important in the course of a day to do as much as we can to remind ourselves that I will not engage in any of those non-virtuous actions. So remind yourself how bad it would be if you were to engage this, how it would affect you in this life, but also how it would bring about much rational results in your future lives. And by remembering those incredible disadvantages, you have to maintain ethical discipline. You have to guard your behavior so that you do not engage in these activities. Okay, so that was about the three physical, non-verbal, non-virtuous actions. And we will explain the four verbal non-virtuous actions. The first one is lying. The second one is harsh speech. The third one, divisive speech. And the fourth one is idle gossip. So we talk all day long, and therefore we have to be very careful with our speech. The first one, lying. Lying is communicating something which is not true. So, for example, and usually it is employed in order to deceive other people. So you don't have diplomas and qualifications, but you say, oh, I have diplomas. You don't have qualities, you don't have education, but you say, oh, I have all this, I have studied all this. You don't possess certain things, but in order to impress others, you say, oh, I have this, I have the others. So, we know from our experience that perhaps maybe the first time that you lie, maybe you get away with it, but very soon people realize that your speech is not honest, you're not reliable. And from that point onwards, people will not believe you. So you lose your face, you lose your credibility. So we talk about the first one of the four non-virtues of the speech, which is lying. And as we say, if you lie, people you will lose your credibility. No one will rely on you, and people will actually, talk to each other, warn each other that, oh, this person, is a liar. You cannot trust what they say. And we see that in society, there is this reaction to lying. It has nothing to do with Dharma. This is, the average person does not appreciate any lying. The second one that we mention is divisive speech. So, anyway, we mentioned as third, but we can explain now. Divisive speech is something which is really bad. This is when you go between two people who have a connection and so far are going along nicely, and you start saying, let's say husband and wife, you go to the husband and say, your wife does this and this, or she says this and this. Then you go to the wife and you say, oh, and your husband said this and this, or has been there and there. So you create discord, you create disharmony. This is really an awful thing to do. It is mentioned in the text that it is quite heavy. It should be abandoned. And instead of causing disharmony, you should try to reconcile and create a harmonious situation. So even in society, even away from Dharma, if you have someone who goes about and creates disharmony and disturbs, the harmony or the peace or the equilibrium, this person is not considered to be a nice person. Okay, the next one in our list is harsh words. Okay, so harsh words here is, of course, if you're using this type of swearing language where you use derogative terms, nasty adjectives to address others or describe others, again, this is not something that anyone appreciates in society. What people like is when you talk respectfully, politely, nicely, when you praise others, not when you're referring to others with derogative terms. The last one is idle gossip. So idle gossip is considered, again, a very negative action because it's something that wastes a lot of time. So to give you an example, what you do is you start conversations and talking about other people's affairs. Like it's none of your business to say this person has money, this other person had made a fortune, but then lost their fortune. This other person did this, did that, the other. So you are offering a commentary about other people's lives that actually doesn't, you should not be discussing those things, whether they are people you're related to, or people you don't know personally. So in the text, it says, abandon idle gossip and instead do some prayers, some recitation of money mantras and so forth. Okay, so we have explained three physical non-virtuous actions for verbal non-virtuous actions, and now we're looking at the three mental non-virtuous actions. The first one is harmful intent, the second is covetousness, and the third one is wrong view. So harmful intent is that type of mind that for whatever reason is harboring the intention to cause harm to somebody else. So you're looking at this other person and you're saying, you just wait and see. Right now, perhaps I don't have the power to cause you any serious trouble, but when I get the opportunity, I will definitely strike. So this is extremely bad, and it's a type of mind that we should not allow to remain in our mind, even for 1 minute. Sometimes we might generate this attitude, but we should recognize it immediately and be shocked that we have it and say, this is not something that I want. This is very serious. Instead of having this harmful intent, I should try to practice patience. The second one is covetousness. So covetousness is that attitude of always desiring nice things that other people have. So we sit there, we notice something that another person has, and we sort of like daydreaming, oh, if only I could have this, I would like to have this and that. The thing is that chances are the other person will not give us this object, but also it's sitting there fantasizing and saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I have it? I would like to have it. Actually, only creates more suffering to us. We are beginners, and we are not at the point of being able to establish effortlessly or easily our wishes and our prayers. Like you see bodhisattvas who are very advanced, they do prayers, they do dedications, and then even they have difficulty getting things to come according to their wishes. So how much more in the case of us who are beginners? Therefore, it is very important that we diminish our desires and we have contentment in our minds. The last one is wrong views. Okay, so wrong views here. Okay, so it's you have thought about it, and having applied different reasons, you have reached to the conclusion that the law of cause and effect does not exist, or the three jewels do not exist, or past and future lives do not exist, for example. So there are different ways of wrong views. Sometimes you are denying something, the existence of something that actually exists, in which case there is deprecation, such as, for example, saying that the three jewels don't exist. The three jewels are there, but you are denying their existence. At other times, wrong views is proclaiming that something which is non-existent actually exists. So in this case, you are superimposing things that don't exist. So actually, as we say, for if you have those wrong views, so for example, if you deny the existence of the three jewels, then in the same breath to say, I don't recognize the three jewels, however, I will practice Dharma. Well, this is extremely difficult. How could you ever engage in any practice? How could you ever create any root of virtue if you do not accept the existence of the three jewels? It's contradictory, isn't it? There are those who believe that the three jewels are non-existent, past and future lives are non-existent, the law of cause and effect is non-existent, and so forth. So we have that particular group. They're still present in India. They're called, in Tibetan, it's called the Gyampenpas, meaning, I think they're called in English, they are translated as hedonists, in the sense that they only believe in this life. They don't believe in future lives. They don't believe in the law of cause and effect. As we say, they have developed the views by actually thinking about it. So the reason that they give is like when you go out in nature and you look, for example, at the mountains, or the grass that grows in the mountains, or the flowers that grow naturally. No one created those. They exist there naturally. So they say they have come about without a cause. So they are denying the existence of the law of cause and effect. Anyway, it is very important for us to always reaffirm our conviction, our thought that the three jewels exist, that the law of cause and effect exists, that past and future lives truly exist, or not truly, but exist, and so forth. So in this way, we have explained the 10 non-virtuous actions, and we say abandoning these establishes the morality or the ethics of practicing the 10 virtuous actions. And this is something that we should do with engaging all our three doors, because they are physical activities, they are verbal activities, they are mental activities. Why should we do this? Well, we should consider the benefit of this. So from the list of 10 non-virtuous actions, if you take away the last one, which is wrong views, right? Because in society, you have people who do not believe in past and future lives. You have people who don't believe in the three jewels, right? So if you take the last one out, you will find that the common rule in society is that this type of behavior is considered to be bad behavior and is breaking the law of the country, the law of the land, and you will end up in trouble with the law if you, for example, engage in killing, if you engage in stealing, if you say lies, if you use harsh words or divisive speech, and so on and so forth. So no one in society appreciates these type of activities. So, for example, this has nothing to do with Dharma or believing in Dharma or not believing in Dharma. No one appreciates lying, and you might get away with lying once, right? So it might benefit you for a very short time, but then when you try lying for a second and a third time, actually you will find yourself in a very difficult situation. All of this. So why should I abandon this? Well, it's not appreciated in society, but also if I think, for example, when I am pierced by a needle, which is a small thing, right? I don't like it. I feel pain. I don't want to experience this. So if someone harms me in this way, I don't like it. So similarly, if I were to harm others in this or other ways, equally, they would not like it. Why? Because all of us wish to have happiness and none of us wishes to have any suffering. And another reason, I am just one single person and all the others are like millions. They are many, they are the majority. So it's very important to abandon non-virtues and establish as much virtue as possible. So therefore, ethics are extremely important. And the thing is, we have no reason whatsoever why we should not be able to maintain the morality of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions and engage in the virtuous activity, 3 physical activities, 4 verbal activities, and 3 mental activities. The thing is that this obtaining a higher rebirth, like the one that we have right now, really depends on ethics. We see that the training in the small scope revolves around this. The individual of the small scope is looking at the suffering in the lower migrations and has the wish to avoid being reborn there, and instead is aspiring to obtain a good rebirth as a human or a god in the next life. And motivated with that wish, by that wish, they engage in practice, recitation, and so forth. So, as Master Chandrakiri says, there is no other cause for high rebirth other than ethics. It causes all the qualities to increase and all results to be obtained. So if you want to establish a higher rebirth, look for no other cause, no other reason other than maintaining the morality of ethics. It causes the qualities to increase. If you have ethics, you will have a long life, you will have resources, you will have intelligence and wisdom. All of those things will increase. Now, in the next verse, he says, but if an individual is lacking ethics, then no matter how much they practice generosity, they will end up in the lower realms. So, for example, he's giving here, we know this case with the Nagas, right? Some of the Nagas are extremely wealthy. They control a lot of treasures. However, if you look at their type of rebirth, it's a lower rebirth, right? So they're an example of someone who practiced generosity but did not keep a sufficient level of ethics. We talk about the 3 higher trainings, which is the higher training in wisdom, in concentration, and in ethics. The higher training of wisdom involves developing the wisdom directly realizing emptiness that becomes the antidote to our afflictions, the wisdom realizing selflessness, and so forth. In order to develop this type of wisdom, this type of realizations, this depends and relies upon having concentration. If you do not have concentration, you cannot develop that level of wisdom. The stronger and deeper your concentration, that will guarantee the development of wisdom that is sharp, is quick, is profound, and it really becomes an antidote to afflictions. So, as we say, in order to have wisdom, you must have concentration. Now, concentration refers here to single-pointed concentration, and we see that we have great difficulty cultivating this type of concentration. The reason for that is because concentration actually relies on ethics. So, ethics is the foundation of all this. If you're capable of restraining your physical and verbal activity, you will be able to cultivate this single-pointed concentration. As a result of that, you will develop calm abiding, then special insight, and then you will have the union of calm abiding and special insight, culminating in the wisdom directly realizing emptiness, and so forth. So we have to consider how we came into this life with this precious human rebirth. We must have created the causes for that in our previous life. And we stress that the main cause is having pure ethics. So pay attention to the words, because it doesn't just say ethics, but it says pure ethics. So the purity of the ethics here has to do with the motivation, because you could be saying, okay, I will not kill, I will not steal, I will not engage in sexual misconduct, and so forth. But if you have attachment for this life and you say, I will not do all these things because I want to be successful in this life, I want to be successful in my business, and so forth, this is not actually pure ethics. For the ethics to be pure, the motivation has to take into consideration that whatever you're doing it for the benefit of all mother sentient beings who are as vast as the vastness of space. So we say that pure ethics is the main reason for obtaining a higher rebirth. However, it is not the only reason. So just pure ethics is not sufficient to guarantee precious human rebirth. The second cause you need to have is to engage in the supporting practice of the 6 perfections. So you must practice generosity and patience and so on and so forth. Again, those practices have to be carried out with a pure motivation, without attachment for results in this life. And the third contributing reason is to make pure prayers, right? So again, the purity of the prayers is that you're not praying for something in this life to be successful, rich, and good in this life. All of this effort that you do, the 3 causes, you have to dedicate so that you will obtain a precious human rebirth. So the precious human rebirth not only gives you a rebirth, let's say, as a human or a god, but also it gives you all this great opportunity to practice the best Dharma. As it is in our case, we have the opportunity to meet with the Lam Rim and become practitioners of the Lam Rim. So just as we have obtained such endowments in this life, it is important that we try to cultivate these 3 causes so that we have, again, those things in our future lives. Right? So by practicing in this way, combining these 3 causes, we will obtain a type of rebirth that is characterized with 8 benefits. So, for example, you would have a healthy body where everything is functioning. You will have long life. You will be free of sickness. You will be good looking. It's quite important that people do not turn away aghast when they see us. Actually, we are quite presentable, and so on and so forth. So there's a list of 8 specific features and qualities that come with the precious human rebirth. The most important thing is that we will have the opportunity to practice the entirety of the Lam Rim, from the very beginning, the proper way to rely on the teacher, up to reaching the state of omniscience. So we will be able to engage the practices of the individual, the small scope, the middle scope, and the great scope. Okay, so let's turn our attention now to our Lam Rim text. As we say, If something is a Lam Rim text, it must have the 3 features and the 4 types of greatness. So we identify this in all the teachings of the Buddha, the 84,000 bundles of the Buddha that are consolidated within the lamp of the path. The great Lam Rim, the middle length Lam Rim, the short Lam Rim, every text that is a Lam Rim text should have those 3 features and the 4 greatnesses. Okay, so as we say, it is very important that the Lam Rim has these 4 greatnesses and the 3 features. And this is a special, unique characteristic that we find only in the Lam Rim text. So, for example, if you look in Guhya Samaja is an incredible tantra. It is called the King of Tantras. Of course, it reveals the path that leads to enlightenment. However, it does not have the 3 features and the 4 greatnesses of the Lam Rim. Or if you look at the Ornament of Realization, again, it's an incredible text. It reveals the entire path, but it doesn't have the 3 features and the 4 greatnesses that we find in the Lam Rim. Therefore, these Lam Rim texts are very important. Remember, let's revise again, verse number 8. Where it lists those 4 greatnesses of the Lam Rim. It helps you see all teachings as free of contradiction. It helps all scriptures dawn on you as personal instructions. It helps you easily discover the enlightened intention of the conquerors, and it helps protect you from the abyss of grave negative deeds. So incredible points here. So as it says, first of all, it helps you see the first greatness. It helps you see all teachings as free of contradiction. Very often, when we look at different teachings, we see them as contradictory. So, for example, between Hinayana and Mahayana, we see this as being contradictory, or between Sutra and Tantra, or when you're practicing Uma, you don't want to, you see it as completely unrelated with Parchin. Or when you're practicing Abhidharma, when you study Abhidharma, you see it as being irrelevant to Parchin or Uma studies and so forth. However, none of those things are contradictory. They are exactly what one person needs in order to practice, in order to reach the state of omniscience. So all of those are necessary practices, and there is no contradiction in them. This is what you will come to understand if you rely on the Lam Rim. The second greatness is that it helps you see all these scriptures will dawn on you as personal instruction. So it's interesting. Of course, you know, the Buddha gave personal instruction to the great Indian masters and so forth. But the Lam Rim is the text that consolidates and summarizes all the crucial points of all these instructions of all the previous great masters, right? And the thing is that if we're looking, for example, at Lam Rim Chenmo, it is about 500 pages. Then you can get shorter Lam Rims for about 300 pages. Now you see here the Song of Experience, how many it is, maybe 10 pages, right? So it can condense all this personal instruction into very few pages. Okay, and if you do practice the Lam Rim, all of those things will appear as your personal instructions. So, for example, the Four Noble Truths, or the Mahayana teachings on bodhicitta, or the teachings on impermanence, or the teachings on selflessness, all of those things will appear as personal instruction. The third one, it helps you to easily discover the enlightened intention of the conquerors. Okay, so what is that essence that we find? The essence that reveals really the intention of the conquerors is the 3 principal aspects of the path, the 3 scopes of the Lam Rim. So you can easily find that. And finally, it helps protect you from the abyss of great negative deeds. The abyss of great negative deeds is the thought that I can omit this particular teaching. I can turn my back to it because I do not need it. So, for example, people say, I'm a Mahayana practitioner. I don't need to look at any Hinayana practices. Or someone says the opposite. I'm a Hinayana practitioner, and therefore Mahayana is irrelevant to me. I don't need it. I will not practice it. The thing is that for the time being, it might not be something which is recommended or necessary for you, but in the long run, if you want to reach the state of Buddhahood, all of those stages, all of those presentations are absolutely necessary. Some of them you might have to rely and train them as preliminaries, and others will be the main ones. But the thing is that none of them is to be discarded. So we have here verse number 8. So as you can see, it's just one verse that mentions the 4 greatnesses of the Lam Rim. However, if you read Lam Rim Chenmo or the Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, it has very extensive explanation. It is advisable that you look at those texts. We continue with the next verse. So it says, therefore, this most excellent instruction, relied upon by countless fortunate ones like the learned ones of India and Tibet, this teaching on the stages of the path of persons of 3 capacities, what intelligent person would not be captivated by it? Okay, so it talks about this most excellent instruction, and this obviously refers to the Lam Rim. So whatever Lam Rim text you're following is considered to be this most excellent instruction. And who relied upon it? So countless fortunate ones who were learned beings, both in India and in Tibet. Okay, so what is that excellent instruction? What does it consist of? It consists of the teachings on the stages of the path of persons of 3 capacities. So we have already explained that really the teaching here is the presentation of the essence of all the teachings of the Buddha, and it comes down to the presentation of the 3 principal aspects of the path or the practices of the individuals of the 3 scopes. So when we talk about those practices, we talk about the path that is shared with the individual of the small scope, the path that is shared with the individual of the middle scope, and then we have the unique path, which is not shared, which is the path of the individual of the great scope. Now, we have explained the type of mentality and what motivates the practice of the individual in the small scope. So if you have an individual that says, I have understood the suffering that comes with lower migrations, I'm terrified of this, I want to avoid it, and therefore I will practice whatever morality and ethics I can in order to make sure that I obtain a higher rebirth in my next life. Okay, so if it is a person who is only thinking that, right, then you cannot say that this is a shared path. How? Because that type of person is not thinking that I will also engage the paths of the middle scope and the paths of the great scope. But if you have an individual that is thinking that they will engage all scopes, but understand that they have to begin with the practices that then become shared with the individual of the small scope, then you have that presentation. Following that, we have the practices that are shared with the individual of the middle scope, where one sees that it's, we're talking here about the bigger picture, which is the suffering of the entire samsara. So one wishes to obtain liberation, and motivated by that, one engages the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, so the 12 links, and so forth. And finally, we come to the uncommon path of the great vehicle that involves cultivation of bodhicitta and how one progresses along the 5 paths and the 10 grounds. Okay, so this is the nature of this excellent instruction. The last line says, what intelligent person would not be captivated by it? All right, so it's really fascinating, really captivating when you see these qualities of this text. So we have a story here from the biography of Lama Tsongkhapa. So you know that he had a close connection with his teacher, Lama Rendawa. Now, Lama Rendawa was a Sakya Lama, and Je Rinpoche Lama Tsongkhapa was starting his own tradition. Now, in one case, Lama Tsongkhapa had started teaching the Lam Rim to his students, and he received a letter from Rendawa. And Rendawa was saying, how are you teaching the Lam Rim material to your students? To which Lama Tsongkhapa wrote a reply letter and said, I I studied the lamp of the path of Master Atisha, and I am delighted. My mind is captivated, and therefore I am also teaching it to my students by following this mode of presentation of Master Atisha. And at the end of the letter, he says, anyway, I'm no one important and I'm full of mistakes. So please don't keep this letter, discard it and burn it. So very interesting that we have at the end this expression of utter humility of Lama Tsongkhapa. Other people would say, please keep my letter. It contains important information and advice and so forth. But he's not boasting at all. He's obviously someone who has realization of bodhicitta, a very humble being, despite his great qualities. The other thing to keep in mind from this story is that here we're talking about two lamas who belong in different traditions. Lama Rendawa was Sakya, but you see, and Lama Tsongkhapa was different, was not in the Sakya tradition. However, there was great harmony between them. There was no sense of separation. They had very pure samaya. So definitely that the fourth point, avoiding the abyss, the great abyss of differentiating and abandoning this or that part of the teachings, was completely absent in their relationship. So these days, unfortunately, there is much more partiality towards one's own sect or one's own lineage of practice and so forth. But we see that that was completely missing, especially in that relationship. So let's move into the next verse, verse number 10. This concise instruction that distills the essence of all scriptures through reciting it or listening to it for even a single session, you will definitely receive powerful waves of merit of teaching and hearing the Dharma. So contemplate its meaning. So we have said many times that the Lam Rim is the type of text that distills or consolidates the essence of all the scriptures of the Buddha. So it does this by consolidating the main points, consolidating the meaning, the words of all these texts. So it says through reciting it or listening for it, even for a single session. So here we're doing this text, the middle length of the Song of Spiritual Experience. It is something that you can recite every day. As you can see here, it says reciting or listening to it. For a session. You could do it in the morning or in the evening and perform this sort of like a meditation, this revising meditation of all the subjects that in the Lam Rim, familiarize your mind again and again with the subject of Lam Rim. So if you do like this, you will definitely receive powerful waves of merit. So there is incredible merit of doing this. And definitely it's something within our capacity. We can recite these texts daily. So you can also hear it or you can teach it to others, right? So it's incredible. You can contemplate its meaning. Okay, so with this verse number 10, we come to the end of the preliminary section of this text. From the next verse, verse 11, we begin with the presentation of how to properly rely on the teacher. And from there, of course, we have the presentation of the practices that are shared with the individual of the small scope, shared with the individual of the middle scope, and the practices of the great scope. So you can see the text that we have done from the first verse that says your body is created from 1,000,000 perfect factors of goodness and so forth. This is an expression of homage. Often in the text we find in Sanskrit some expression of homage, such as, for example, Namo Manjushri or something like this. But this text has this verse as an expression of homage. And we come all the way to verse 10, which are the preliminaries. Having completed the preliminaries in our root text, Geshe says, now I will move into the other text, the essence of refined gold, from next week to read that material. Okay, so that's it for tonight.